Hello everyone, and I welcome you all to this one shot revision of a very important topic, that is nutrition in plants. Right. So let's begin with this. So if we talk about the different components of food, whatever we consume in our day-to-day life, so your main important components includes your carbohydrates, proteins, fats, your vitamins, minerals, and of course the most important one, that is your water. Right? These different components, they basically act as a building block for different parts of your body, right? So these are the components which help build up your cells, your tissues, and in return also your proteins, your hormones, and all these things. And therefore it is very important to have a balanced diet so that all these important components are taken up by your body, right, in appropriate quantities. So if we cut. Hello everyone, and I welcome you all in this important topic. Cut. Hello everyone, my name is Amrit, and I welcome you all to this important topic, that is nutrition in plants. Right. So let's have your one shot revision and quickly go through this very important topic. So if we talk about the different components of food, right? So they basically include your carbohydrates, your proteins, fats, vitamins, minerals, and the most important of all, which is your water, right? And all of these different components, they are very important for your body because they act like building blocks for your cells, for your tissues and different organs, and not just your cells and tissues, for the different uh, proteins and hormones which helps to build up your entire body, right? And therefore it is said that it is very important to have a balanced diet so that all of these components are taken up by your body in appropriate quantities. So moving forward, if we look at the food chains, right? So this is necessary to understand because here we get a very important idea that how plants, they play a very important role in the food chain, right? So all the plants, they are essentially your producers, right? And when I say producers, I mean that these plants, or your any organism which has a chlorophyll in it, right, they can make their own food. They are not dependent on outside sources for food. They have the capability to make food in their own bodies, right? So all the plants, right, all the green plants, they are the producers. And then you see that lot many other organisms are directly dependent on these plants or the grasses, right? So these group of organisms which you see over here, these become your consumers, right? Or more specifically, they become your primary consumers. And then these animals, right, who are your carnivores, they depend on these herbivorous animals, right? So what we see here is a chain which is forming, right? And there are different chains present in a particular ecosystem. So these group of animals, right, who are basically your carnivores, they become the secondary consumers, right? So but here what we fail to realize is that plants, how they play such an important role, because your secondary consumers, they won't get food until and unless your primary consumers get them, and your primary consumers are directly dependent on your producers, right? And therefore plants, they become such an important and vital part in the entire food chain and your food webs, right? So food webs are basically your different food chains interconnected with each other, right? So that is your food web. So if we talk about plants, right, so the mode of nutrition in them, so these plants, they are also called autotrophs, right? So basically plants or organisms which can make their own food, and they are the only organisms that prepare food for itself, right? And the raw materials which are required by plants, that includes your carbon dioxide, your water, and your minerals, right? So carbon dioxide is something which the plants directly take from the air. Water and minerals is something which is absorbed by the roots, right? So if we talk about nutrition in general, right, so what exactly is nutrition? एक डेफिनेशन पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से अगर हम समझने का ट्राई करें तो इट इज द मोड ऑफ टेकिंग फूड बाय एन ऑर्गेनिज्म एंड इट्स यूटिलाइजेशन बाय द बॉडी. So if we are saying that we are consuming a lot of carbohydrates, lots of minerals, lots of proteins, so exactly how these things, how these different components are being utilized in the body of a particular organism, right? Is it used to make up your amino acids? Is it used to make up complex carbohydrates? Is it used to make up the structure of your cells? Is it used to make different kind of hormones or any particular substances? And so how exactly they are utilized by the body, and more importantly, what is the mode of taking this nutrition, right? So why is these nutrients, different types of nutrients, important for us? First of all, it helps to build their bodies, right? All the organisms, they take in nutrition because it helps to build the different parts of their bodies. It helps for growth, right? It helps for repairing damaged parts of the body, and more importantly, energy to carry out life processes, right? So the different types of food that you consume, right, so that food, it is a storehouse of energy. And how is that possible? Because this same food, it is broken down in our cells by a process which we call respiration, and through this process energy is generated, right? And therefore food, it becomes such a vital part for every organism. So let's talk about this term, right? So I already told you that all your plants, right, or all your organisms which contains the pigment chlorophyll, they have the ability to make their own food, and therefore we call them autotrophic organisms, right? So if we break this word auto and trophic, so auto means self, right, and trophic comes from the word trophos, which means nourishment. So autotrophic organisms are those which have the capability, which are self-sufficient to make their own nourishment, right? And the other word which comes up, right, is heterotrophic, right? So all your consumers, your primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, most of the animals, humans, all of us are heterotrophic. Mode of nutrition is done by us. So again, heterotrophic, it comes from the word heteros, which means others, right? So basically all your heterotrophic organisms, they are dependent on outside sources of food. They are dependent on others for their food. Just like in case of humans, right, we are dependent on plants, we eat meat, right, and therefore we are dependent on other sources for our nourishment. So if we look at the basic structure of a cell, right? So this is a typical plant cell which I am showing you over here, right? So it contains different parts, right, which are called your organelles, right? We call them organelles. But one important organelle which I would like to point out here is this one, right? So this organelle is called your chloroplast, right? It is called your chloroplast, and chloroplast, it contains a pigment called chlorophyll, right? So these two terms are very important which you have to remember. Chloroplast, right, it's an organelle and it contains a pigment, right, which is chlorophyll, which gives the leaves its green color, right? So chlorophyll, when we say chlorophyll is a pigment, right, so basically it's a molecule, right, and because of which your leaves, they appear green in color, right? So if we look further, right, so let's get into the detailed process of how photosynthesis is done, right? And photosynthesis is your process through which plants, they make their own food, right? And it is a very important process. This is something which will keep on haunting you till your 10th grade, right? So photosynthesis के लिए देखते हैं कौन कौन सी important चीज़ों की ज़रूरत पड़ती है. First and foremost, your water, right? So your water and minerals, they are taken up by the roots from soil. ठीक है, तो जो आपके सॉइल होते हैं वो अब्सॉर्ब करते हैं वाटर और मिनरल को. दिस वाटर एंड मिनरल, इट इज देन ट्रांसपोर्टेड टू द लीव्स. ठीक है, आपके प्लांट के जो अलग अलग लीव्स प्रेजेंट होते हैं वहाँ पे इसे ट्रांसफर कर दिया जाता है. द अदर इम्पॉर्टेंट थिंग विच इज नीडेड is your carbon dioxide, right? So carbon dioxide, it is taken up by your leaves. So now both the raw materials are present with your plant. Now another important component which helps in this process of photosynthesis is the organelle chloroplast, right, about which we talked about. Chloroplast, which contains your green pigment chlorophyll, right? Still a very important component is left, and without it the process of photosynthesis will never take place, and that is your sunlight, right? So all these things are necessary for the photosynthesis to take place. Your carbon dioxide, chloroplast, water and minerals, and your sunlight. All of these components, right, they combine together. Your water molecule, right, which is made up of your hydrogen and oxygen atoms, they are broken up, right, because of the energy present in the sunlight. And the end product that we get is carbohydrates. And the carbohydrates which is being talked about here is your glucose, right? So we get glucose from this overall reaction, and still one very important thing is left, that is your release of oxygen, right? And this oxygen, it is very important for the survival of almost every other organism on earth, including your animals and humans as well, right? So this is how your entire process of photosynthesis takes place. Carbon dioxide, water and minerals, they are taken up by the plants. In the presence of sunlight and chlorophyll, they are being converted into carbohydrates, and oxygen is generated, which is then released from the leaves, right? So in order to achieve this process, there are special structures, right, on present on your leaves, which are called stomata. So stomata, अगर आप यहाँ पे देखें तो these are small openings which are present on the surface of the leaf, and through these openings carbon dioxide is released out, and oxygen is something which is taken in by your leaves, right, by your plants. And these stomata, right, so in stomata mein there are special structures present which are called your guard cells. So what happens is these guard cells, they control the opening and closing of the stomata. And how does it do that? When water enters into these guard cells, right, so what happens is they get swelled up, right, वो फूल जाते हैं, they get swollen up, and because of which the structure it opens, right. So as your stomata opens, right, your carbon dioxide is something which is then taken up, and through this process your oxygen is given out. And when the stomata has to close, right, so what happens is the water is released from these cells, right, so your cell, they are not swollen anymore, वो वापस अपने पुराने position में आ जाते हैं, they become flaccid, and the opening it closes, right? So that is how the working of guard cells take place, and that is how the opening and closing of stomata is being controlled. Now, talking about your chloroplast and chlorophyll, right, so like I told you, chloroplast, it is a type of plastid, right. Plastids are organelles, right, and the plastids, they are of different types, and chloroplast is one type of plastid which contains your pigment which is chlorophyll, राइट तो यहाँ पे इन दोनों टर्म्स के बीच में कंफ्यूज मत होइएगा. क्लोरोप्लास्ट जो है वो एक तरह का आपका ऑर्गेनल होता है, राइट. क्लोरोफिल जो है वो एक तरह का पिगमेंट होता है, एंड ये पिगमेंट की वजह से आपके लीव्स को ग्रीन कलर, और दे अपीयर ग्रीन इन कलर, right. So this entire structure is your chloroplast, whereas chlorophyll are present inside these structures which you see over here, right. And you know, it is said that sun is the ultimate source of energy for all living organisms, and this is a very true statement. क्योंकि अगर आप फिर से मैं आपको रेफरेंस दूं आपके फूड चेन का, राइट, तो वहां पे आपने देखा था दैट कि आपके सेकेंडरी कंज्यूमर्स जो थे, they were dependent on your primary consumers, and your primary consumers, they were dependent on your producers, और producers के केस में क्या आ जाते हैं आपके, these all are your autotrophs. Now in order to make their food, autotrophs, they require sun, right, more specifically they require sunlight. जब तक उन्हें sunlight नहीं मिलेगा उनके बॉडी में फोटोसिंथेसिस का प्रोसेस नहीं होगा, राइट. जब तक फोटोसिंथेसिस नहीं होगा तब तक वो फूड नहीं प्रोड्यूस कर पाएंगे, वो फूड नहीं प्रोड्यूस कर पाएंगे. सो दैट विल नॉट बी देन ट्रांसफर्ड to your consumers, which in return will not be transferred to your secondary consumers, right. So no sun, that means that basically equates to no life, right. So you know, and therefore it is said that if there would be no sun, then there would be no photosynthesis, no food, no oxygen, right, and life, it would become completely impossible, right. There would be catastrophe all around you, right. So that is why sun is very important for the survival of each and every living organism on earth, right. So if we look at the detailed reaction of photosynthesis, right, so this is how it goes. Right. So here your carbon dioxide, right, plus your water, it reacts to give us glucose plus water plus oxygen, right. And these are your chemical formulas for carbon dioxide, water, glucose, again water, and your oxygen, right. So on the surface this reaction looks all right, right, but still this is not the perfect reaction because two very critical things are missing from this reaction. The first of all is your sunlight. Like I told you that photosynthesis is something which will never take place in the absence of sunlight, and the other important thing is your chlorophyll, right? So these two things are very important for the process of photosynthesis to take place, and now your reaction becomes complete, right? CO2 plus H2O in the presence of sunlight and chlorophyll will give you C6H12O6 plus H2O plus O2, right? ये रिएक्शन है, आप इसे गांठ बांध के याद कर लीजिए, राइट? अगर आपको सुबह नींद से 4 बजे भी कोई सुबह उठा के पूछे कि भाई फोटोसिंथेसिस का रिएक्शन बताओ, तो ये आपको आना चाहिए, राइट? फेयरली सिंपल, कोई इसमें ज़्यादा कॉम्प्लिकेशन है नहीं, right? And again, a reaction which will follow you till your 10th grade, 12th grade, and even later in your college, right? You might also have seen certain trees which have red or yellow colored leaves, right? And now a question might come that अभी तो सर आपने बोला था कि आपके leaves जो होते हैं वो green color के होते हैं because of chlorophyll, right? But like I said, there are several types of pigments present in your plants, right? And these pigments can be of different color, they can be of red, they can be yellow colored pigments, right? So accordingly, जिसकी क्वांटिटी ज़्यादा होती है उस समय प्लांट में, राइट, या आपके लीव्स में, तो आपके लीव्स उसी कलर के दिखाई देते हैं, राइट? एंड सो बेसिकली प्लांट में सिर्फ ग्रीन कलर के पिगमेंट नहीं होते हैं, दे हैव रेड, येलो, वायलेट, डिफरेंट डिफरेंट कलर के पिगमेंट्स आपके प्लांट के बॉडी में प्रेजेंट होते हैं, राइट? So another organism, right, which can make its own food is your algae, right? तो आप अगर कभी भी सी साइड गए होंगे या किसी रिवर के पास गए होंगे, पॉन्ड के वहां गए होंगे, तो यू वुड हैव सीन दोस ग्रीन स्लाइमी सब्सटेंसेस, राइट, जिसके ऊपर अगर आप पैर रखें तो यू विल इजीली स्लिप. So these bodies, right, they are called algae. They again are your autotrophs because they contain chlorophyll, right? And because they contain chlorophyll, they have the ability to make their own food, right? And therefore they are not dependent on any outside sources for their food requirement. So apart from carbohydrates, right, तो photosynthesis में हम लोगों ने देखा कि a major carbohydrate is being generated, that is your glucose, राइट? तो बेसिकली कार्बोहाइड्रेट क्या होता है? कार्बोहाइड्रेट इज एनी मॉलिक्यूल दैट इज मेड अप ऑफ योर कार्बन, हाइड्रोजन एंड ऑक्सीजन. ग्लूकोज का केस लेके देख सकते हैं. ग्लूकोज में हम लोगों ने देखा दैट इट इज मेड अप ऑफ 6 एटम्स ऑफ कार्बन, 12 एटम्स ऑफ हाइड्रोजन एंड 6 एटम्स ऑफ ऑक्सीजन, राइट? सो कार्बोहाइड्रेट आपका कोई भी ऐसा मॉलिक्यूल होता है जो कार्बन, हाइड्रोजन और ऑक्सीजन के एटम से बना हुआ होता है. द नंबर ऑफ एटम्स दे में वेरी, राइट, वो चेंज हो सकता है. नाउ हम लोगों ने पहले देखा, राइट, कि आपकी बॉडी जो है सिर्फ कार्बोहाइड्रेट पे सरवाइव नहीं कर सकती है, इट रिक्वायर्स अदर थिंग्स एज वेल. सो प्रोटीन्स जो होते हैं, राइट, प्रोटीन्स आर बेसिकली योर नाइट्रोजीनियस सब्सटेंसेस. जो मेजर कंपोनेंट होता है वो आपके प्रोटीन के मॉलिक्यूल में, दैट इज मेड अप ऑफ योर नाइट्रोजन. एंड plants, they cannot absorb the form of nitrogen that is present in air. आपके air में जो nitrogen present होता है वो inert form में होता है. inert form का मतलब non reactive form में present होता है वो. so जो soil होता है, right, आपके soil में there are certain bacteria which converts gaseous nitrogen into usable form and release it into soil. सो बेसिकली ये क्या करते हैं, जो एटमॉस्फेरिक नाइट्रोजन होता है, राइट, उन्हें अलग अलग तरह से प्रोसेस करके इट इज देन बीइंग कन्वर्टेड इनटू अ फॉर्म जो प्लांट्स डायरेक्टली यूटिलाइज कर सके, राइट? एंड अपार्ट फ्रॉम दैट, अगर आप आर्टिफिशियल तरीके से प्रोवाइड करना चाहते हैं नाइट्रोजन एंड सर्टन अदर एलिमेंट्स लाइक फॉस्फोरस, सो देन वी यूज योर फर्टिलाइजर्स एंड योर मैन्योर, right? So apart from photosynthesis, right, there are several other modes of nutrition which is seen in nature, right? So there are certain plants जिनमें chlorophyll नहीं होता. अब आपको पता है कि photosynthesis करने के लिए chlorophyll is a very major requirement. So what do these plants do? They resort to different form of nutrition, right? They then use heterotrophic mode of nutrition in which they are dependent on other sources for their food requirement. So in certain plants like your cuscuta, right? So they have these yellow wiry branches, right? And your cuscuta, they are basically parasites. ठीक है, अब यहाँ पे समझिए कि किसी भी पैरासाइट को सरवाइव करने के लिए किसकी जरूरत होती है, एक होस्ट की जरूरत होती है। तो यहाँ पे इन दोनों का रिलेशन क्या होता है, होस्ट जो होता है वो अपने बॉडी में नॉर्मली चीज़ों को प्रोसेस करता है, राइट? वो अपना, उसके बॉडी में न्यूट्रिशन होता है। अगर हम प्लांट्स की बात करें सो दीज कैन बी एनी टिपिकल प्लांट्स जो फोटोसिंथेसिस के थ्रू अपने बॉडी में ग्लूकोज प्रोड्यूस कर रहे हैं, राइट? एंड दैट इज बीइंग यूटिलाइज्ड बाय देयर बॉडी। पैरासाइट्स क्या करते हैं, वो होस्ट के बॉडी के ऊपर सरवाइव करते हैं। होस्ट जितना भी न्यूट्रिशन खुद से बना रहा है उसी न्यूट्रिशन को वो कंज्यूम करते हैं, राइट? So the plant on which your cuscuta climbs, right? So that becomes your host. And cuscuta, it deprives the host of the valuable nutrients. जो भी nutrients आपके host के body में present है वो आपका parasite consume कर लेता है, right? And therefore ये जो आपका पूरा mode of nutrition है, we call it parasitic mode of nutrition. ठीक है? तो यहाँ पे आप देख सकते हैं, इट्स अ बेटर व्यू, राइट? कि किस तरह से आपके कस्क्यूटा के जो ब्रांचेस है दे रैप देमसेल्फ अराउंड योर होस्ट प्लांट एंड फ्रॉम हियर दे टेक इन न्यूट्रिशन, राइट, इनटू इट्स ओन बॉडी. Similarly, there are organisms, right, which would be much more familiar to you, right? And they most these three organisms which I have shown you, all of them they survive on blood, right? Human blood, animal blood. So this is your lice. Okay, this is your bed bug, and we are all familiar with mosquitoes. So whenever you are bitten by a bed bug, right, तो bed bug उस समय क्या कर रहा है, वो आपके blood के ऊपर survive कर रहा है, right? So that is food for them which is being produced in your body. आपकी body outside sources consume करके आपके body के अंदर different तरह के nutrients बना रहे हैं, and that is then consumed by your bed bugs, right? Or for that matter your lice, or for that matter your mosquitoes, right? So all these then become parasites, and the organism जिनमें से ये blood suck कर रहे हैं they become the host, right? Also, in nature your nature is so amazing, right? We see so many different types of organisms. So there are also plants which are insectivorous, that means वो insects consume करते हैं, right? And a very good example of that is your pitcher plant, right? So pitcher plant we call them that because they have this structure, like ये jug जैसा structure होता है जैसे हम pitcher बोलते हैं. तो इसमें क्या होता है, whenever a insect it enters through this opening, right? So ये जो ऊपर का lid होता है आपका वो close हो जाता है and the insect is trapped inside. और जो आपका ये plant होता है इसके अंदर आपके digestive juices होते हैं because of which your insect it is slowly digested. एंड जो भी आपके बिल्डिंग ब्लॉक्स होते हैं आपके इंसेक्ट के बॉडी के, दैट इज देन बीइंग यूटिलाइज्ड बाय द प्लांट बॉडी, राइट? सो नाउ द क्वेश्चन कम्स इज व्हाई डू दीज प्लांट्स रिजॉर्ट टू बीइंग इंसेक्टिवोरस, राइट? सो आंसर टू दिस क्वेश्चन इज, ये जितने भी प्लांट्स है जो इंसेक्टिवोरस नेचर के होते हैं, बेसिकली व्हाट आर दे ट्राइंग टू अचीव, दे आर ट्राइंग टू रिप्लेनिश देयर नाइट्रोजन रिक्वायरमेंट, राइट? सो ये जिस तरह के सॉइल में ग्रो करते हैं आपके इंसेक्टिवोरस प्लांट्स, वहाँ पे उन्हें नाइट्रोजन नहीं मिलता है sufficient quantities में, and we have already learned that nitrogen is a very important component for the production of proteins, right? So by consuming these insectivorous plants, your insects, your plants, they are substituting it with your nitrogen source which they generally take in from the soil, right? And that is why these these plants they resort to being insectivorous. Also there are certain organisms which survive on dead and decaying things, राइट? जैसे आपके डेड लीव्स हो गए, डेड प्लांट्स हो गए, राइट, डेड एनिमल रिमेन्स हो गए, एनिमल फीसीज हो गए, ये जितनी सारी चीज़ें जो सड़ रही होती है, डीके कर रही होती है, राइट, उनके ऊपर ये ऑर्गेनिजम्स ग्रो करते हैं. मोस्ट ऑफ द केसेस में दे आर योर फंगाई, राइट. आपने देखा होगा शायद कि योर मशरूम्स दे यूजुअली ग्रो अराउंड प्लेसेस जहाँ पे आपके लीव्स दे आर डीकेइंग, या कोई एक लॉग का पीस होगा, राइट, विच हैज ब्रोकन ऑफ फ्रॉम द एक्चुअल ट्री एंड इट इज डीकेइंग नाउ. तो लॉग्स के ऊपर आपके मशरूम्स ग्रो कर रहे होते हैं, राइट. सो fungi, right, what do they do is these organisms they take nutrients from dead and decaying matter. ठीक है, जैसे अगर आपने मानसून के सीजन में देखा होगा कि आप ब्रेड अगर बाहर छोड़ देते हैं बहुत दिनों के लिए तो उसके ऊपर आपके फंगस ग्रो करना स्टार्ट कर देता है, राइट. सो ये जो आपका मोड ऑफ न्यूट्रिशन होता है, वेयर दे टेक इन न्यूट्रिशन फ्रॉम डेड एंड डीकेइंग मैटर, वी कॉल इट अ सैप्रोट्रोफिक मोड ऑफ न्यूट्रिशन, right. And again these organisms which survive through saprotrophic mode of nutrition, we call them saprotrophs, right. So fungus जो होता है आपका या fungi होते हैं, they also grow on pickles, your leather, clothes and other articles which are left in hot and humid weather for a very long period of time. तो अगर ये जो आपके ब्रेड के ऊपर जो ग्रीन स्पॉट्स, ब्लैक स्पॉट्स, वाइट स्पॉट्स आपको दिखते हैं, सो बेसिकली दीज आर योर राइजोपस. और इस तरह का कुछ स्ट्रक्चर होता है आप उनका, जिनमें एक स्टेम लाइक स्ट्रक्चर निकला हुआ होता है, राइट. एंड दे हैव दीज ब्लॉब ऑन टॉप ऑफ इट. और ये ब्लॉब्स के अंदर क्या होता है, आपके स्पोर्स प्रेजेंट होते हैं, आपके फंगल स्पोर्स प्रेजेंट होते हैं. एंड वेन एवर दे बर्स्ट, राइट, तो उसके अंदर से आपके स्पोर्स रिलीज होते हैं. दी स्पोर्स दे आर वेरी लाइट वेटेड, दे कैन बी इजीली कैरिड अवे बाय एयर, और दे फॉल इन नियर बाय प्लेसेस. और वहाँ पे जब भी ये फॉल करते हैं तो वहाँ से एक न्यू स्ट्रक्चर जो है जर्मिनेट कर जाता है, right. So basically when they land on wet and warm things, they germinate, right. Another mode of nutrition, right, which is seen in nature, that is your symbiosis, right. So kuch organisms aise hote hain which live together, right, and they share both shelter as well as nutrients with each other. And ye jo aapka relationship hai, we call it symbiosis, right, or it is also known as your symbiotic relationship, right. Example, very good example of this is your lichens, right. So lichens आपके दो पार्टनर से बना हुआ होता है. One is your algae, the other one is your fungus, right. अभी algae के बारे में हम लोग ऑलरेडी पढ़ चुके हैं, that it contains chlorophyll, right. तो since it contains chlorophyll मतलब it has the ability to perform photosynthesis. बट देन अगेन फोटोसिंथेसिस करने के लिए हमें किसकी रिक्वायरमेंट होती है, वी रिक्वायर कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड एज वेल एज वाटर एंड मिनरल. तो यहाँ पे एंटर करते हैं हमारा फंगस. फंगस क्या करता है, फंगस प्रोवाइड्स इट विद शेल्टर एज वेल एज वाटर एंड मिनरल्स. तो वाटर एंड मिनरल एल्गे को मिल गया है. एल्गे अब फोटोसिंथेसिस करता है, फोटोसिंथेसिस करके इट जनरेट्स कार्बोहाइड्रेट्स. दैट कार्बोहाइड्रेट इज देन अगेन बीइंग शेयर्ड विद योर फंगस. तो इस तरह से दोनों ऑर्गेनिज्म एक दूसरे का हेल्प करते हैं एंड दे लिव टुगेदर, राइट. नाउ अनदर क्वेश्चन कम्स इज दैट हाउ न्यूट्रिएंट्स आर रिप्लेनिश्ड इन द सॉइल. बिकॉज अगर एक पर्टिकुलर एरिया में आपके प्लांट्स ग्रो कर रहे हैं तो आफ्टर सम टाइम्स देर आर चांसेस कि ये एरिया में जितने भी आपके सॉइल के अंदर न्यूट्रिएंट्स प्रेजेंट थे वो सब खत्म हो जाएंगे, राइट. तो ये जो न्यूट्रिएंट का सोर्स होता है ये किस तरह से रिप्लेनिश होते रहता है, राइट. सो आर्टिफिशियल तरीके से हम इसे अचीव कर सकते हैं बाय अप्लाइंग फर्टिलाइजर्स एंड मैन्योर, बिकॉज दोज फर्टिलाइजर्स दे कंटेन न्यूट्रिएंट्स सच एज योर नाइट्रोजन, पोटेशियम, फॉस्फोरस, राइट. एंड अगर आप किसी फार्म में आपने विजिट किया होगा तो देयर यू माइट हैव नोटिस दैट फार्मर्स दे from time to time they fill they add these nutrients, right. They add it to the soil ताकि आपके जितने भी न्यूट्रिएंट्स है वो रिप्लेनिश होते रहे, राइट. बट देन अनदर क्वेश्चन कम्स इज, ये जो न्यूट्रिएंट्स हैं ये वाइल्ड में किस तरह से रिप्लेनिश होते हैं? वहाँ पे तो पॉसिबल होता नहीं है कि आपके फार्मर्स जाके ऐड करते रहेंगे न्यूट्रिएंट्स. सो बेसिकली व्हाट हैपेंस इज योर डेड लीव्स, राइट, आपके डेड एनिमल रिमेन्स, योर एनिमल फीसीज, ये जितने भी चीजें होती हैं दे आर एक्टेड अपॉन बाय योर सैप्रोट्रोफ्स. ठीक है, सैप्रोट्रोफ्स इनके ऊपर एक्ट करते हैं. ये जो कॉम्प्लेक्स सब्सटेंसेस से जिनसे आपके डेड लीव्स और आपके एनिमल रिमेन्स बने हुए होते हैं उन्हें ब्रेक करके वो सिंपलर सब्सटेंसेस में कन्वर्ट करते हैं, राइट. एंड दीज सिंपलर न्यूट्रिएंट्स आर देन एडेड इनटू द सॉइल, राइट. एंड दिस इज हाउ योर साइकिल कंटिन्यूज. जो भी डेड रिमेन्स होते हैं आपके प्लांट्स के, एनिमल्स के, दे आर बीइंग ब्रोकन डाउन बाय योर बैक्टीरिया एंड फंगस व्हिच इज प्रेजेंट इन द सॉइल, एंड दोज न्यूट्रिएंट्स आर अगेन added into the soil which is then later on consumed by your plants, right. Another structure that we see, right, so they are your rhizobium, राइट. सो जैसे पहले हम लोगों ने डिस्कस किया कि जो आपके प्लांट्स होते हैं दे कैन नॉट यूटिलाइज नाइट्रोजन विच इज अवेलेबल इन एयर. ठीक है, क्योंकि मैंने आपको बताया कि नाइट्रोजन वो एयर में N2 फॉर्म में प्रेजेंट होता है, एंड दिस इज एन इनर्ट फॉर्म, राइट. दिस इज अ नॉन रिएक्टिव फॉर्म. सो देयरफॉर प्लांट्स दे नीड नाइट्रोजन इन अ सॉल्युबल फॉर्म, राइट. तो आपका राइजोबियम बैक्टीरिया ये क्या करता है? राइजोबियम बैक्टीरिया इट कन्वर्ट्स एटमॉस्फेरिक नाइट्रोजन इनटू यूजेबल फॉर्म. यूजेबल फॉर्म मतलब इस फॉर्म में कन्वर्ट कर देता है सो दैट प्लांट्स दे कैन डायरेक्टली कंज्यूम इट. नाउ व्हाट हैपेंस इज राइजोबियम बैक्टीरिया इट कैन नॉट मेक इट्स ओन फूड. So they often live in the roots of your plants such as your grams, peas, moong, beans, right, and other leguminous plants, and they provide them with nitrogen, right. So agar aap koi leguminous plant dekhen, so they contain these root nodules, right, these structures in which aapke bacteria present hote hain, राइट. ये आपके राइजोबियम बैक्टीरिया प्रेजेंट होते हैं. ये कन्वर्ट करते हैं आपके नाइट्रोजन को जो सॉइल में प्रेजेंट है इनटू अ मोर यूजेबल फॉर्म, जिससे प्लांट्स वो ये नाइट्रोजन टेकअप करते हैं. अगेन दिस नाइट्रोजन इट इज नेसेसरी फॉर लॉट मेनी थिंग्स, राइट, फॉर प्रोड्यूसिंग प्रोटीन्स इन प्लांट बॉडी. इन रिटर्न प्लांट क्या करते हैं? प्लांट प्रोवाइड दीज बैक्टीरिया विद फूड एंड शेल्टर, राइट. सो अगेन यहाँ पे हमें क्या देखने मिल रहा है? वी सी अ symbiotic relationship, right, where two organisms are helping out each other, right. So that was it, your one shot revision, right. I hope this session was very helpful to you, and I'll meet you in the next module.